Hey friends, October is really doing 95 in a 60-mile-an-hour zone, isn't it? I've whiplash constantly from the news and the virus numbers coming down and then going up and wondering what's going to happen next. The election has reached its fever pitch, even though it's felt pretty fever pitched for a long time. And every entity that has ever sent me an email about anything is either reminding me to vote or that it's Prime Day this week. I've done my Christmas shopping some, but the time hasn't changed yet, and I don't know what way is up anymore, and I still don't know what day it is, and I just really thought all this would be easier by now. But it's not. And I'm still wondering if I should be doing something differently. Should I be less afraid? Should I be more afraid? Should I be more optimistic? Should I be less optimistic? Am I staying hopeful? Am I still gaining weight? Should I crack back into that giant thing of yeast I got back in April? Because maybe making bread would be grounding. Should I stop doom scrolling Twitter and go for a walk? Probably. I say all of this to say two things. If this is still or newly or differently a really hard time, you're not alone. In fact, most everyone is with you, so give grace to you and give grace to others. And number two, I think we're just the right people to hear the story this morning about Moses and God's glory. Because like him, we need God. We want to know God more. We want to see God right with us, making a difference in the world around us. And so this story from Exodus is really mind-blowing because Moses just flat out asks to see God's glory, and God says, sure, and wedges Moses into the cleft of the rock and passes by so that Moses can see God's back, which is more than any human had been allowed to see before. You see, no one could look at God's face and live. It was just too much for humans, and it feels like we may have lost our ability to be shocked a little bit, and so it might be hard for us to imagine what it would be like, but seeing God's face would stun you to silence, and it would suck the breath right out of you. It would dissolve your bones and leave you a little puddle on the ground. At least that's what people thought would happen. No one really knew because it had never happened, thanks to the infinite mercy of God. You see, God protected people from the full impact of God's holiness, the same way that Moses was protected. God shielded the people by hiding in an envelope of light that was the only thing most people could see. And sometimes it looked to them like a pillar of cloud or fire or water bursting from a rock, but no one ever mistook it for a natural phenomenon because it was always brighter than that, like a doorway into another world. And though the door mostly stayed closed, even the little slats of light coming in from the cracks around the door were enough to blind you if you looked right at them. The light was a sure sign of God's presence in the world. And for lack of a better word, they called it God's glory. And they saw it a lot. When they were in the tent worshiping together, sometimes the light would be so bright they had to squint, and it would still leave stars in their eyes long after they left. But God stayed hidden. They couldn't see God. They could only see God's glory, which was all most of them could really stand anyway. But Moses saw more. Moses saw God's back, and it was such a strong dose of glory that some of it rubbed off on him. You see, the rest of the story in the book of Exodus is that when Moses came down from the mountain, his face was glowing, which not surprisingly made the people feel afraid. No one would talk to him, and so he finally persuades his brother Aaron and some of the other leaders to come up and at least talk to him. And when they didn't die, the others got less afraid, and they would come a little closer, and Moses gave them the 10 Commandments again because they'd gotten it wrong the first time around. And as he spoke them, though, he covered his face with a veil. Maybe he didn't want people to be scared, and maybe he was sick of everyone staring at him, I don't know. But from then on, whenever Moses went to talk to God, and when he came back, he would pull up the veil so people could see that his face was shining. You see, they might not have been able to see God directly, but they could see God's glory reflected on Moses. God gave them someone they could see and listen to with his own personal spotlight. So the churchy word for this phenomenon is transfiguration. And this isn't the only time transfiguration happens in the Bible. It happens to Jesus in the New Testament, up on a mountain, and Moses is there in that story too. And while people who knew them watched, they were changed into beings of light, as if their skin had become transparent for a moment, and what had been inside them all along shone out for everyone to see. It wasn't anything either of them did. They didn't change. They didn't work and strive and try to do everything right so that God's light would be in them. They were changed by God. God whose glory transfigures everything it touches. It is a light that cannot be captured or controlled any more than God can be. It can only be experienced in ourselves or another. It can only be believed. And we are asked to believe that at certain breakthrough moments in time, the glory of God is visible in the world. That it comes and it makes us squint and our eyes water from the glare. We are asked to believe that God's presence is so near that we can see it for ourselves. Believing that, sometimes it seems as if setting out to see glory is really the only thing worth doing in life. But seeing may not be everything, because we are also asked to believe where we cannot see. When we are stuck in dark rooms that we don't know the contours of and can't find the light switch, we're still asked to believe that the light is there. And in those situations, we have the stories. The stories are incredibly powerful once you start to believe them. They can change their life, and if we believe in the truth of the story about Moses, then we live in a little bit different world than those who do not. We live in a world where glory is possible and where the light might break through at any moment. We believe in what we can see, but we believe in more than that. Earth and flesh, comfort and sorrow are important to us, but not elemental. The world is not only made of them, the world is made of light, which is straining against the skin of the whole world even as we speak. But even when we can't see the light, we believe it because we know the stories. We know that God's glory is pulsing right under the surface of things, with the power to transfigure even our darkest days. Moses' plea, "Show me your glory," is still our prayer and still our life's work and our church's only real aim. We worship because we want to see glory and for light to break through in a world that is sometimes dark. It is as a church that we learn the stories, and it is the community where by grace we see them lived out. Maybe we see it in neighborhood kids climbing all over a pumpkin patch, or in a place where a parent can go to get food for their family when money is tight. And not just a can of beans from the back of someone's pantry, but real food that grew in the ground and was picked just for her. We might see God's glory in those few minutes we get to be together outside, sharing in communion in a new way, or when we get to go into the sanctuary to pray and the light streams through the stained glass window. We do church and we do ministry together no matter what else the world throws at us, because we believe that seeing God's glory is a real possibility and maybe the only task in life that finally matters. And so we come together to help each other get a glimpse of that glory. Now, I say we believe, but of course I mean we want to believe. That's part of the mystery and even the gift of our faith. Every day we count on things we cannot see to hold us when we fall. We entrust the weight of our lives to things we can't prove or understand. And by the power of our belief, we choose the kind of world we want to live in, the kind of church we want to be, the kind of people we want to be. Those who know at any moment that no matter the darkness, the light can break in. We choose to believe in a world where somehow there is light coming in everywhere. I've tried to be pretty careful not to talk too much about a silver lining in a time where so many have died or been sick, where injustice is so rampant, and where times are so challenging in every way. I always try to be a hopeful person, but I try never to bright side people in the face of suffering, and there is so much real suffering. But if there is a silver lining, light glimpsing out from behind a dark cloud, it may be that we are learning to see differently, and that we are turning into the kind of people that want to seek God's glory with all we have. We may be a people learning to appreciate smaller things, acknowledging truths that we had previously wanted to avoid, people who notice the needs of others and notice our own yearnings for greater depth in our relationships, our discipleship, and our communities. We may just learn to see God's glory, or at least to try to follow the lead of Moses and ask to see God's glory and to see God's light breaking into the world around us. In every place that has a crack, and every place, as Leonard Cohen would say, has a crack that's where the light comes in. So I invite you to pray with me this week. Show us your glory, O God. Show us your glory. Amen.